going to do a tutorial on how to matte an image in Photoshop when you want to print something but don't want to have to crop it. So this image that I'm going to use as an example is 12 inches by 18 inches, which is a 2:3 ratio. If I wanted to print this in a 16 by 20, like on a canvas, that's a 4:5 ratio. So if I went into my image size and I wanted to print this at, say, 20 inches, I'm only at 13 inches this way, so I would be short. Or if I went to 16 inches for my height, I would have to crop 4 inches from my width to get this to print on a canvas, which I might have room for here, but I really wanted this to be offset a little. So here's a way you can do that and not have to crop an image. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to unlock this background image, and we're going to add a blank layer below our image for the canvas. So when you click your new layer icon over here, if you hold the Control or Command T when you do that, it will add the layer beneath the active layer rather than on top of it. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to resize the canvas instead of the image. So if we go into Image, Canvas Size, here's where we can change what we want our finish size to be. Okay, so first, before I change the whole thing, I want to add a thin white border before we put the colored mat around it, so it looks like the bevel of a mat. So I'm going to check relative, and that's going to let me tell it just how much to add without having to do any calculations. So I'm going to add a 1/4 inch to the width and height, which will be divided half on each side. So that means I'm going to add an 1/8 of an inch border all the way around this image. Don't worry that this is grayed out. I'm going to show you how we're going to fix that in a second. So what we're going to do and why we wanted this extra layer here, we're going to say okay. So now there's that transparent layer which got bigger. So it didn't change the size of our image. It's just changing that canvas size that's underneath. So now we can make our foreground color white, and I'm going to do an Alt backspace, that'd be Option Delete, sorry, on a Mac, and I'm going to fill that layer with white. So now I have that white border. So now we're going to add the rest of the sizing to complete a matte look. So we're going to go back to our, we're actually going to add another layer underneath this. So I'm going to hold my Control key again and hit that. We're going to add one more layer because we don't want to change this white layer. We want to add another color underneath of this. Go to Image, Canvas Size. So now I'm going to uncheck relative because now I want to tell it the final size I want this to be. So I want my width to be 20 and I want my height to be 16. And when I say OK, it's now going to add enough space to make this a 16 by 20 finished size. So now I'm going to choose a color that I want to use for my mat. So I'm going to click on my foreground color picker, and I usually like to choose a color from within the image. So I started by choosing, I thought maybe I'd go with like a browner tone, maybe something over in here. The first number I chose, I wrote down the number, was 786926. So I chose this like light brown, and you can always change this, so don't worry if you don't like it later. We'll say OK. And then again, I'm going to do my Alt backspace and fill that layer. So now you can see there's that white border we created on this layer, and now we have our color. But that's just a plain color. We want to make this look like an actual mat board texture. So we're going to add a pattern on top of this. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to go to Window and select Patterns. And from here, we're going to come down to Legacy Patterns and More, and then Legacy Patterns in Artist Surfaces. And this is the one I like to use, and this is, if you hover over it, it should pop up. It's called Coarse Weave. So we're going to double click on that, and we can close this box. So what it does is add a separate layer so that this is totally customizable. When it first applies it, it has this gray color to it, but don't worry, we're going to make some changes to this. First thing we want to do is double click on this pattern icon and get this pattern fill box, and you could change the pattern from here, but what I want to do is make the scale of this pattern bigger because we have such a big image. And for this one I went with about 286. It's just one of the kind of defaults it locks into. And we're going to say OK. And it looks like there's sort of a repetitive pattern here, but when you zoom in on it, that kind of goes away. You don't really see that. You'll see it just looks like mat board. But of course we don't want it to be black and white. So what we're going to do is, just like if we were working with textures, we're going to change the blending mode. So if you go up here to normal, soft light is going to make a very subtle texture. Sometimes I like to use multiply, and that's going to darken the actual color of the texture. And I'm going to go with that one, but then I decided I wasn't sure I really liked the brown color, so I'm going to change it to a green. So if we just go back to our layer here, go back to our color picker, we can then try a different color. And I tried a couple greens, and the one I ended up with was 7E7E3A. And I did select that kind of out of the grass, and then I went a little bit lighter. Say OK, and do our Alt backspace again to rechange that. And I like that better. And if you wanted it to be a lighter color, again, check your, go back to the pattern layer and check the blending mode. So you can see a soft light's going to make it a much lighter looking green, where multiply is going to make it darker. And I think in this case I like that one better. But you can play around with it and change that color as many times as you want. You can also try changing the pattern if you want to do something a little bit different. You just double click on there, click this down arrow, that will take you back to that same menu, and you can go back into your legacy patterns. And I like artist surfaces. I think work really good for this. If you want something more simplified, you could use something like that one. So just double click it. It's still scaled. Say OK. If you zoom in, you'll see what that one will look like. So it's a much different kind of a pattern. But you can play around and modify the pattern and the color as many times as you like. And this will work in Photoshop Elements and as well as in Photoshop. So have fun.